assume that you either didn't have school or you were off doing something else on Friday. So we actually didn't meet at all. I didn't do anything on Friday. Let's see, what am I doing here? Okay. And students have just been kind of cranking away at their slow car projects, turning things in, and I have been slowly cranking away at grading things that have been coming in. I believe I'm at the exam right now, grading the exam. That's the level I'm at this point. So that we should have an idea how everybody is doing. So far it looks like everybody is doing just fine. But I will give you a more specific idea soon. Let's see here. Oh, actually, I wasn't even talking about Friday, was I? Were you here last Wednesday? I don't think you were here last Wednesday either. Okay, so actually last Friday we didn't meet at this end because we actually had a day off here. Well, the students did, the teachers and the staff all had to go to meetings, which were just so much fun. But I forgot to mention that to everybody, and so people might have been a little confused that there was nothing going on Friday. I was busy doing a whole bunch of stuff for that meeting and got a little distracted. It happens. So what we're going to do today, let's make sure we're recording this so that people are following along with us. Looks like we're recording. What we're going to do today to start off is just take a look at our syllabus and see if we need to change anything since we had that. Let's see if I put that in there. Yeah, see, I didn't put it in there. It would have been October 5th. No, October 7th would have been the day that we were doing all that. And we should have charted chapter 6, apparently, but we didn't because we weren't here. And then today should be exam 6. And so we're a little bit behind because of that snafu on Friday, my fault. So I'll get this video out to everybody and we will do chapter 6 today. And then we're done with the book. We have, see, I'm in my grading, I'm all the way up to working on exam 1 through 3. So I'm about I'm about 2 weeks, half a month or so behind us. Let's see, is that 2 weeks? It's more like 3 weeks, but anyway. I'm a few weeks behind us in grading, but I will get that graded, and once I get that graded, it's going to be pretty quick after that, because all I'll be doing is grading your projects. Going through homework and going through exams takes more time, and kind of a pain in the neck. I like doing bookwork as much as everybody else. But let's take a look at chapter 6 and figure out what we're supposed to be learning here. Chapter 6 is all about communication. And they cover a few different things in here. One of the things they spend the most time on is actually writing. So that's all of 6.3, which goes from chapter or page 157 to the end of the chapter. Well, not quite to the end. They also talk about equations and numbers, but it is really to the end of the chapter, though. But they talk a lot about writing, and that's important because you'll spend a fair amount of your time as an engineer or in any technical field really writing things. You will write reports, you will write memorandums, you will write emails, you will write all kinds of things. And you'll be doing it every day of your career. And it's important that you learn to be a good technical writer. But you will have opportunities to learn technical writing as you move through your education from better technical writers than me. So I will not spend a lot of time hammering that stuff, even though it's half the chapter or more. But I want to give you a basic overview and just expose you to some of the ideas of technical communication or engineering communications, and then move on to actually using some of it. So after exam 6, after we go through this chapter 6, and I will email you exam 6 today, for every project afterwards, you will either write a technical report concerning the project, or you will give a presentation, a technical presentation concerning the project from here on out. In fact, there will be no final exam, really. The final exam will be a presentation on your final project. The final project will include everything from, the second week of November when we start our computer-aided design. Your computer-aided design will be part of your final project. You will be doing a design on the computer first, and then you will actually be using the 3D printer to prototype and to test and to fix and to retest and so on and so forth. Your final design for the last month almost, or the last at least couple of weeks, we'll spend doing that. So it'll be the last month will be your final project. And so right now we've got 1, 2, 3 projects before the final project. I'm not sure if we'll have time for all 3 of them. We've already done a civil engineering kind of project with the bridge. We're doing a mechanical project with the car. And now we have a mechanical project with a trebuchet, we have an electrical project with a motor, and we have a hydraulic project with hydraulics. So we may actually skip the trebuchet project to move on to something electrical so that we can get some more experience with different things. We may move on to our motor project next, and then move on to a hydraulic arm project. So we can get electrical and hydraulics under our belt before we start computer-aided design. But with each of these projects here, you will either have a written or a oral presentation to give. You'll either report on your project through writing or by creating some kind of a PowerPoint presentation or something similar and presenting it to the class. So, having said all of that, let's talk about engineering communications. If you were going to go to listen to 3 or 4 different people speak on 3 or 4 different subjects, let's say one person was going to speak on business, and one person was going to speak on art, and one person was going to speak on computers and computer engineering, what do you think the major difference would be between these 3 types of these 3 types of presentations, or these 3 types of communication? For example, we'll start with the businessman. What kind of things would you expect the businessman to talk about, and how would you expect him to present his information? Okay. So that's a basic overview of what they might talk about. What kinds of methods do you think that they would use to convey that information? For, let's say, for the artist, for example, if they're showing us modern art, or if they're talking about modern art or presenting something about modern art, what would you expect in their presentation? What would you expect from their presentation? Okay, so would you expect a lot of text on their slides? Not really, right? You wouldn't expect them to have a slide full of paragraphs of text. And frankly, unless you're talking about poetry or plays, or the scripts of plays, or the actual writing of a book, you probably wouldn't have text on your slides in any of these things, hopefully, because text is kind of boring. If you're going to an art presentation, you want to see the art, right? In fact, if I'm an art presenter, the best thing to do would be to do my presentation where? In an art gallery, right? The best thing would be to have the actual art there. And that is very important to think about. What does your audience expect? What does your audience want? And that's a good place to start thinking, right? Now, sometimes your audience might expect something that you don't want to do. So let's talk about business presentations. You said businessmen would talk about economics. So what would you expect to see and to hear in such a presentation for a businessman? Charts and, charts and numbers and projections, but frankly, even businessmen find that kind of stuff boring. Okay? Businessmen, marketers, even they find those things boring. They would like to see something a little bit more engaging. And it turns out that visual things, not just charts, but imagery and animation and allegory, things that are related to but not necessarily exactly what you're talking about, but could be connected to in some way. Those things can be very helpful when you're presenting information to somebody. So if we're doing business, and let's say we're a toy company, and we want to sell toys. Well, of course, every single business that sells and makes toys has a time of the year that is the best time of the year for them. What is it? Christmas. And so no matter what, if you're giving your presentation in January or April or November, pretty much if you're in the toy business, you're talking about Christmas. And so it might be a good idea to have a Christmassy kind of theme going on in your presentation. Maybe the timeline of your theme is 12 days of Christmas. Maybe your theme is red and green. The theme colors are red and green and white. Maybe Santa Claus is on every slide doing something with your charts. And it sounds goofy, but it helps people to remember things. It gives people an anchor to kind of ground to. It gives people direction. It gives them engagement, right? Now in engineering, we don't do things like that very often. We don't, we're not going to talk about Santa Claus in engineering very often. Although there are many engineers that work in the toy company, and then it would start to be appropriate for them. But what we might do, if we're an engineer for, let's say we're a rocket scientist, right? We are literally, there we go. Let's say that we are literally, I wanted you to see me put my feet up on the desk. There we go. Dang, what's my camera doing? Okay. So anyway, So if let's say that we're a rocket scientist and we're literally sending rockets into space, there would be nothing wrong with having some kind of a countdown. You know, we always talk about rockets count down from 10 to 1, blast off, whatever. There would be nothing wrong with doing something like that. There would be nothing wrong with having an animation on the side of the slides that we're using that show the rocket being built a little bit at a time, so that the other engineers looking at our slide presentation know what stage of the rocket we're at, or what stage of the building we're at. And if we're giving a presentation on the development of a rocket or the building of a rocket, whatever. So there's nothing wrong with trying to include something that is visual and that is imagery, that is actual, some kind of an image that helps our presentees to get engaged in the presentation. It's quite an important aspect of presenting and communicating in general. Presenting is one of the main kinds of communication that we do as engineers, and so I will talk about it quite a bit today. However, that's just part of it, and it's something that you have to think that the overall idea of presenting and engaging the people you're presenting to is very important to think about throughout the entire process of communication. Because you will present things in papers, you will present things face-to-face, and you will present things in actual presentations that you give. Now, let's take a look at some examples of presenters. I want to go here. I want to change my source. Okay. Let's take a look at a bad presentation first. Let's look at I like this guy. Don McMillan. Don McMillan is a guy that goes around to different businesses and different conferences, and he gives a presentation on how not to present things. And he is specifically going to use some techniques and some slides that show you some bad techniques. So let me turn it up here a little bit. Somebody always puts this computer on mute. I don't know who it is.
This is typically called life or death by PowerPoint, right? We communicate in today's world, okay? This is what we don't want. This is typically called life or death by PowerPoint, right? We think in PowerPoint now. This is a true story. I was driving to Colorado a couple years ago. I hit a patch of ice on I-70 coming out the Eisenhower Tunnel, going like 65, 70, maybe 90 miles an hour. And I started spinning at top speed, and my life flashed before my eyes, and I swear to you, it was in PowerPoint.
Okay, so we start off right away with this slide that he calls Death by PowerPoint, right? This is a very visual slide. It's got a lot of things in it. It's got a lot of colors and arrows and everything else, but it's just too much. And this is something that happens a lot to a lot of people when they use PowerPoint. They put too much in front of the audience. So we really want to live by the creed, keep it simple, right? We want to keep it simple. Even when you're talking to people who know what you're talking about and can handle a little bit more complexity, you still want to keep it simple. Keeping it simple is not just about conveying information, although it is partly about that. It is hard to really get any information off of this slide if you're the viewer or if you're the presenter. There's just too much. Your brain can only handle so much. You know, if you ask somebody to try to memorize everything on this slide and then cover the slide and tell them to repeat back everything that's on the slide, they might get 6 or 7 things. 6 or 7 things is about what the human mind can handle in a single kind of instance. And that's been, backed up and proven by many, many research groups all over the world throughout time and just experience as human beings. So you don't really want to have a lot of things going on. Keeping it simple would be 2, 3, 4 things, less than 5. Going over 5, you're starting to hit the threshold of what human beings can really absorb and process and remember. Okay? But another thing that's going on here is that there's just a lot of words. You have a lot of shapes and a lot of words. Well, shapes can help with things, but only to a point. Colors can help the mind to remember things, but only to a point. Images are much better. Images are much easier to remember, much easier to connect to things, especially if they're related, right? And so numbers and words, shapes, and colors, just not helping us here at this point.
And how bad has PowerPoint gotten? This is actually the number of PowerPoint presentations per day. Look at that, it's 43 million per day in 2007, 54 million 2008, 69 million this year, 88 million per day next year. Now I looked at this chart, look, that is growing exponentially. I looked at this chart, here's home foreclosures for a year. You see that's growing about the same way. I realized that PowerPoint actually caused the mortgage meltdown. So this is a thing I do called Life After Death by PowerPoint. Basically, don't do these things with PowerPoint. These are the things that people do that drive me nuts. And the only way to show them not to do this is to show them. So the biggest one I see, the most common PowerPoint thing, number one, people tend to put every word they're going to say on their PowerPoint slide. Although this eliminates the need to memorize it.
Okay, so no matter how many times I show this, no matter how many times I talk about this, it's very difficult for me to get this through people's heads. Do not read from the slides. Do not read from your notes. It is bad communication to read something to somebody, okay? Now, there are situations where it's necessary to read something to somebody. For example, if you're speaking in front of a very large group and you might get nervous and you might forget things, you might wander off into tangents, it's not a bad idea to write down what you're going to say. Politicians do it. They read off teleprompters, right? All kinds of people do it, not just politicians. Anybody who's going to make a very important speech or communication to a lot of people and they have to hit certain points, they have to make sure they don't forget things, they will write it down or they will memorize it and they will give it verbatim or very close to that. And I do that from time to time. Very rarely do I do it in a classroom. I used to when I started. When I started teaching, I would write down notes and I would go through every single example so that I made sure that I wasn't going to mess up anything. What I discovered is that it made for very unsatisfying classroom conversation. It's much easier, or not much easier, it's much better to go in a little bit unprepared, make some mistakes, and then have to backpedal and figure things out. Because then your students realize you make mistakes, and they learn how to fix mistakes. And they don't feel so uncomfortable when they make mistakes. Now, when you're presenting, you don't necessarily want to make lots of mistakes because you often have a certain amount of time that you can work with, and that at the end of that time, they're going to cut you off when you're making presentations. That happens a lot in a lot of situations. So you need to get through things very quickly. So you might have some notes, but you don't necessarily need to read from them. Maybe it's just 3 key points that you need to remember when you're talking about this slide. Maybe it's just a few numbers that you want to remember concerning some data on this slide, or whatever. But having some notes, following notes, and reading notes are two different things. So you want to be sure that you learn the skill of preparing a presentation, preparing some kind of a talk or whatever it is you need to give, without necessarily learning it verbatim or reading it verbatim or anything else. And so what you need to do is you need to be very prepared and you need to practice. You need to practice giving this presentation. You need to rehearse in front of an audience, in front of a camera, so that you can look back at what you did or whatever else. There's lots of ways you can do it. But I can't tell you how many times I have told students this over and over and over again, and then when they give a presentation, after I've told them this 5 or 6 times, don't read from your notes, don't read from your slides, they still come in and do it, because it is very hard not to. Giving a presentation can be nerve-wracking, and it can be difficult in many ways, but preparation and rehearsal can help with that.
Open mistakes or slides crowded, worrying, boring, you lose your audience attention before you even reach the bottom of your first slide. Second most common, font size is important. Size matters. Too small, and that's not good for anybody. On the other hand, too big, and you're looking tomorrow. You just look like an idiot. Don't have your fonts moving. Keep your text stationary. There's nothing more annoying than text that doesn't blinking. Don't have it blinking. Don't have it spinning. Don't have stuff flying around the screen. You drive people with ADD crazy. You're just like, oh, it's happening. Oh. Now, since I'm talking about fonts, people are...
So all these presentation softwares can do that. Don't. If it's text, just put it on the screen. There are situations where animating something can be valuable, can be helpful. But those times are so rare that it's not really worth doing in most cases. I would avoid animation unless you have somebody professional who's going to do it for you, and unless you've got a lot of experience. I would try to keep it simple once again.
I'm really into fonts. I've noticed this. That's jokes that I know. Comic Sans and Helvetica will walk into a bar and ask the bartender for a drink, and the bartender says, sorry, we don't serve your type here. That kills at a font convention. Oh, that's a good one. It's a type. I get it. The font you choose, be very careful. Everybody has their favorite font. The font you choose sends a message about who you are as a person. There's a long list of fonts. We pick one. That reflects our personality. We're sending an unspoken message. So, for example, if you choose Carrier New, it means you're organized and structured. You like to pretend you're still using a typewriter. If you choose Comic Sans, it means you think you're funny. And if you choose Times New Roman, it means you're lazy, apathetic, and unimaginative, and you always use the default.
So this is goofy, but it's actually for real. There are many fonts available. If you open up Word, the default is Times New Roman, but there's a reason for that. It's not just because it's the most boring font out there. It's actually because Times New Roman is the most readable font that there is. Times New Roman is what we call a serif font, which means it has these little things at the tops and the bottoms of the letters that delineate the font. They actually form rows with the letters. So if you look at the top of the T, there's these little things going on at the top, and if you look at the bottom of the T, there's these little things going on. And the same in the I and the M, and they're like little sideways tails or something. Okay? That is on purpose. Courier has very similar things. At the bottom of the R, there's that little platform. You know, this is the reason that typewriters used Courier, because it's easy to read. Comic Sans does not have that. The reason that it's called sans in French means without. So sans means without. But in French, what they're saying is that this does not have the serifs. The serifs being the little delineators on the top and the bottom. So Comic Sans is a sans serif font, and there are many sans serif fonts. Tahoma, for example, is a sans serif font. Arial is a sans serif font. Sans serif fonts look very clean and very open. They look like they should be easy to read, and when they're big, and when the font is big and there's not many letters and there's not like a paragraph of words, they are easy to read. And so if you go into PowerPoint, the actual, I think in PowerPoint, the default font is Arial. Because when you're giving a presentation, you want your big headings and lists of things that don't have a lot of words in them but you want them to look clean. You want the presentation to look clean. And so when you're writing a paper or you're writing an email or something else like this, I would recommend a serif font. Unfortunately, in Outlook, I think that the default is not a serif font. It should be, but it's not. And I think the reason that it's not is because people, when they're writing emails, usually write fairly short emails. And that's the same thing with like texting. Texting is a sans serif font. But I think that, I don't know if I've actually changed mine. I should if I haven't, because I often write long emails with lots of information in them, and when you're writing a long email, you should use a serif font. When you're writing anything that has lots of paragraphs and lots of lines of words, you should use something like Times New Roman. Times New Roman is the easiest to read by far. Your eyes have an easy time to follow the lines because the serifs drag you from left to right. So font analysis, this part is kind of a joke, but kind of not a joke. When you're doing a presentation, you should use a sans serif font. Arial is a really good one. Tahoma is a really good one. When you're typing a paper, typing a memorandum, email, serif font would be a little bit better, like Times New Roman.
If you choose Georgia, it means you speak with a southern accent. If you choose Arial, it means you like The Little Mermaid. Oh, a lot of Arial people. If you choose Old English, it means you enjoy malt liquor. You know this. We got a few more. Helvetica, that means you're a mayonnaise lover. That's a stretch. Oh, that is a stretch. Blackadder, that means you're an African-American accountant. That one requires some thought. Sorry. And if you like wingdings, it means you're a nerd and you have no life. Now, if you type in all small letters, some people do that, all small letters, that means you're quiet, shy, and unassertive. If you type in all capital letters, that means you yell a lot. There. If you type small letters followed by capital letters, it means your cap lock is stopped on. Don't you hate when that happens? Usually going along for a while, you look up, oh, darn! And then finally, if you have a mix of capital letters and small letters, that means this is a ransom note and you are a kidnapper. Very hard. The fourth most common compliment, avoid excessive bullet pointing, only bullet key points, too many bullet points, and your key messages will not stand out. In fact, the term bullet point comes from people firing guns at annoying presenters.
Okay, so this one goes back to the original slide that we saw. Again, it's just too much, right? Too many things on a single slide, too many things on a single thought. Your mind, the human mind, between 3 and 5 things really is really where we want to be. If you go 6 and 7, you're reaching that point where the human mind is at its limit. And you don't want the human mind to be at its limit. This is true in paragraphs. This is true in long papers, everything else. You want to break things down into small bite-sized chunks, right? You want a paragraph to have 4 to 6 sentences, 5 to 7 at the most. You want each sentence to have just 1 or 2 ideas in it, maybe 2 ideas that are connected, maybe just 1 idea. If you start putting 3 ideas in a sentence, people forget what the first idea in the sentence was by the time they get to the 3rd idea, right? And it starts to become a run-on sentence as well. There's just so many ways to point out when people try to fit too much into the brain. If you just give it a little bit of time with just a little bit of information, the brain can do a lot with that. And then you move on to the next thing, and then it can do a lot with that, and it starts to remember things more clearly and more readily. So the brain does have limits, and we need to understand and work within those limits. Even really brilliant people need to work on just a few things at a time. I still really like the idea. Well, it's not even an idea. It's just a fact of life that multitasking really just means that you're doing a lot of things poorly. Okay? Human beings do not multitask. We can do a lot of things at once, and we can do a lot of things poorly. And people that think they're great multitaskers are usually really good at doing a lot of things badly. They're never, ever good at doing a lot of things well, because nobody is good at doing a lot of things well. Human beings are just not that way. In fact, the only things that are good at doing things that way are computers. And only specialized computers can even do that. They have to be designed that way. So the best thing to do is to do one or two things very well, and then move on to another couple of things and do those things very well. Same thing goes for presenting information, communicating information, and absorbing information.
This slide, by the way, has crashed PowerPoint. Apparently there's a max about how many bullet points you can have. Right? The other thing you can do is have animations. People love animations. That stuff zooming in and out and left and right. You get seasick watching it. Turns out if you're a visual learner, your effectiveness as a speaker will go up. But if they're easily distracted, they are not even paying attention to what you're saying. They're just watching the cool stuff. And there's regions to this graph. There's the simple but effective region, the active but confusing, the effective but boring, the active but ineffective, the dull but static region, the busy but useless region over there, the ADD only region there up in the corner, the useful musing.
Okay, hopefully you get the idea.
Call me old McDuff. EVLSI member, VI, EEE, EIT, NCAA, NAACP, AARP, AAA. I want a position as CEO, COO, CFO, CIO, CTO, CMO, CSO, CPO, CYO, VP, EVP, or EIO.
Okay, I wanted to skip forward to this slide because we already talked a bit about animation and how it can be distracting both the presenter and the presentee. But I want to talk a little bit about making sure that our information is clear, and this is a great slide for that. Acronyms are very common in today's language, especially in the texting culture that we deal with today. In the pre-texting culture, you had acronyms that stood for things that were, for some reason important to somebody. Now we have acronyms that aren't really important to anybody. We just use them so that we can text faster, like ROFL or something like this, A totally worthless acronym, except that it just shortens our texting time. So acronyms in general are really not good communication devices, and I would not use them at all. But really anything that might need explaining, that might need clarifying, that might need more detail is a good idea to think about when you're communicating. You don't want to try to communicate to somebody. Communication with somebody is not about communicating in the fastest way possible. It's in the clearest way possible. So sometimes communicating clearly is a very quick thing. Sometimes it takes a little more time. And that includes writing things out, explaining things, making sure that what you're talking about is the same thing they're talking about. This miscommunication because of misunderstanding is very, very common in the technical world. And so it's very important to be very clear with what you write. We don't care in engineering if you use the same verb over and over and over again. If something is red, call it red. Don't try to think of a better word for it because you've already used the word red 12 times. Your English teacher cares about that. We don't. We want you to use the word that makes the most sense every time. Who cares how many times you use it? We don't care about adjectives being used over and over again, verbs being used over and over again, nouns being used over and over again. We don't care. Use the best word in the best situation every time. Don't try to be creative in your writing as far as flowery things go or whatever else. Don't try to sound smart in your writing. Try to sound clear and straightforward. That is the most smart thing you can do in engineering. If you try to sound smart, engineers will immediately know what you're trying to do, because they've all done it before, trying to impress people, okay? And they've all realized that it's not worth working at. If you sound clear, people will think you're smart. If you try to sound smart, people will think you're just trying to sound smart. And they'll just wait around for you to figure out that we don't want you to sound smart, we just want you to sound clear. So it's a very important part of technical communication in everything, in writing, in presenting, in whatever else, and speaking. Speak clearly. Don't try to sound smart. Don't try to make it, flowery or anything else. Especially, it's important to not use words that you're not entirely sure what they mean. If you're not sure what a word means, use a word you do know what it means, because you can really confuse people that way. There are many people in the engineering and the technical world that have extremely huge vocabularies because they're very bright people. They're not just smart technically. They're not just smart with computers. They're smart across the board. They're very good at everything. And to try to use a word that maybe means something different than you think it means, you can really get yourself kind of stuck in a place that you didn't think you would be stuck in. Because you're saying one thing, but what you're meaning is something is different. You've got a little bit of a contradiction between what you're saying and what you're trying to say. Okay.
I want to be the EIEIO of a company someday. That's actually my dream. Hi, I'm the EIEIO. Nice to meet you. Call me Old McDonald. That's it. That's my pot.
Okay, so
there's a better pot.
So he gets towards the end of this and he starts to talk about different things that you can do that are just kind of flowery and goofy. Creating a presentation that has good information and is giving the audience good information is difficult enough. Don't try to make it more difficult by adding in things that are not necessary. You may want to put something in that helps people to remember what you're talking about, but usually a simple image is good enough. Usually a simple chart is good enough. Usually a short bulleted list of 3 to 5 key points is enough. You don't want to spend time in PowerPoint without putting more information. Information is much more important. So one other thing that I want to mention that I'm not sure he has a good example of here, I'm looking for one. That is filling the frame, and this includes just about everything that you do. Let's go back to here maybe. So let's say that he was giving a presentation, and he ended on, this was his slide, and this is all he put on the slide. This slide is not filled, okay? And if all he was going to talk about was the font analysis of the Helvetica font, he should include some other things here. Maybe some examples of letters from the font, maybe a big letter of the font pointing to different features of it. Maybe, I don't know, whatever. But you should fill the page, you should fill your canvas with the information that you're going to present. Whether that means you're going to make it bigger or rearrange it somehow or include some more material, that, it could be any one of those three or a combination of them. But you really should not have a page in a report or a page in an email or a page in a thing that has just blank space. Blank space at the bottom or at the top is not a great thing. Filling in a little bit of space, a little bit of white space in the middle is okay, but really include an image. Include some kind of something. Make your writing bigger, whatever. But fill the space that you have. If you're sending out a memorandum on a piece of paper and you only have a little bit to say, cut the paper down to a smaller size. Or provide more information so that your memorandum fills up more of the page. It's not always possible to do this, but it is always a good idea to try. You don't want to just fill it up with random useless junk. You want to make sure that you've got all the information that you need to and all the tools to convey that information as you can out there. But you don't want to leave a lot of blank space. And I have a lot of students who have done a bulleted list down one side of the page, but the other side of the page is just empty. Well, if you're going to just have a bulleted list, put it down the middle of the page. Or try to include some kind of image with your bulleted list that is going to help the presentees to remember what you talked about. Or you're going to be able to point out things on your image, or maybe a chart or something. But it's very important to include things in your communications that help the people you're communicating to understand, to connect, to engage, to remember what you're doing. This is true in all forms of communication. So that is a preliminary kind of discussion, a basic discussion about communication. In the chapter, they talk a lot about many different, very specific things concerning writing and visual aids and how to do drawings and how to do this and the other thing. Those things will be useful to you. Let me take a look at. Did I give a homework assignment? I don't remember. For chapter 5. Yes, in chapter 5 I gave, or chapter 6 rather. I did give you the assignment to go and do a couple of problems. Let's take a look really quick. Oh, there are only 2 problems. Well, in these two problems, all you're really going to be doing is, actually there's only one problem. 6.1, no, there is 2 problems. There are 2 problems. So all you're really going to be doing is clarifying a bunch of sentences. It's pretty straightforward. You should go through section 6.3 and learn what it means to clarify sentences, to eliminate unneeded things. It's not that hard, really. You've done it in English classes before. But what you're trying to do is you're trying to make a very clear, concise statement that gives the information that is necessary without going overboard. Okay? And that's just a matter of practicing. And you can get enough information from reading the end of chapter 6 to do that without much trouble. The exam will consist of learning to do some communications by doing some communications. We will have things like some emails. We will even have a little bit of a presentation for you to maybe do some work on. Those are some things for you to do from chapter 6. Like I said, I'm not going to spend much more time on chapter 6 because we will spend the rest of class practicing communication and getting some actual work, some actual field work in communication. So that is chapter 6 for you. I will send you an exam here later today to complete after you've done the homework. And then we will get started on our next project come Wednesday. Maybe we might wait till Friday, depending. I don't have everybody's work for the slow-moving car project, so hopefully get that all finished up as well. And then we will get started on our next project, the motor project. All right. We will see you later.